Folks, we spend a lot of time on this channel talking housing, real estate, commercial, United States focused. We're going to stretch our wings, get a little uncomfortable together, and we're going to talk about what's going on in China. We're going to do this with the one and only Lance Lambert from Fortune. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great, doing really good. And yeah, let's jump right to it. And so one thing that's interesting, historically speaking, is that across the world, when countries have went through periods where their residential housing markets have went through very prolonged slumps, have also coincided with their deepest economic hits. So in the
Correct.
United States, we've actually had two legitimate housing crashes over the past 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Most well known is the '08 housing bubble,
Mm-hmm.
which we saw a 6-year housing recession from '06 through the end of 2011, and housing's impact on the economy fell for 6 straight
Yeah.
years from '06 to 11. Huge economic hit. It
Mm-hmm.
coincided with the longest post-World War II recession in the US, or the deepest, which is the Great Financial Crisis. And one problem being is that when your residential market is overbuilt and you cannot rev it up through lower interest rates, your monetary wings are clipped. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what happened after GFC, is we couldn't get the economy going because the interest rate sensitive part of the economy was broken in a different way than it's broken now. Very
Correct.
different.
Very different.
The other time that happened in the US was we had a huge housing boom in the 1920s, and it went into a slump in 1926, 1927.
Mm.
And it was a prolonged housing recession, and it coincided with a foreclosure boom that happened right as the 1929 stock market crash hit. And it's one of the untold stories about the Great Depression, is that there was an actual housing crash and a home price crash that happened in the country, and a foreclosure crisis.
And a financial banking crisis. A lot of banks went out. Financing was very different. Mortgage
Exactly.
financing was very much interest only and terms. 5-year term was, I believe, most common back then.
And so some of the other periods where we've had housing recessions, like '81, mortgage rates got real high and it created a construction bust, but not a full-blown housing crash. And then the economy recovered when rates went down, because
Right.
it wasn't they weren't the same type of property bust that the mid 2000s and the Great Depression one was. So you look across the globe to China. It's a country that has went 3 decades without a
Yeah.
recession. Three
Yeah.
decades.
Three
And
decades.
what happened during that period is that the most cyclical part of the economy, residential housing, boomed the whole time, because
Yeah.
they were just boom construction. And
I just sorry to interrupt, but I think people need to realize. So I've been doing real estate active investments since 2002. In the US, we had kind of this real estate never goes down mindset from like 04, 05, 06, and then obviously it blew up because real estate can go down. And think about that. We had 3, maybe 4 years of just this fictional belief that real estate always goes up. China's had 30 years of that's 3 generations of real estate
yeah.
only going up. There's been some nuttiness going on in bad behavior. So sorry to interrupt, but that's just wild to think about 30 years of that. Oof.
So an estimate last year was that they have 60 million vacant units in the country.
60 million.
California has 15 million units total.
Total.
So, and they have entire cities that are empty.
Yeah, they do. I've been there.
And so they are in a place where resi can no longer be an economic engine. Resi is overbuilt and prices are crashing in some areas. And we found out this week that the official data is underreporting the actual price
Shocking. Shocking.
And one thing about price declines, not price declines like we had last year, where you're kind of blowing off just a few months in Austin of
Right.
growth, things like that. these are this because they sat at the top for a long time.
They
What
did.
happened is their prices peaked were peaking even before like the pandemic, and they've kind of been in a lull, and it's like that they were sitting there and distress was kind of building, and now they're moving down. So that means that a lot of the loans that were occurring were at the peak prices.
Oh,
Where for us, if we had, let's say the prices had actually fallen 10% in the US, it would
sure.
still have been a big deal because so
No.
few people bought at those prices. One of the issues for the 2008 bubble is that prices kind of peaked in 05 and sat there a long time, and transaction volume was very high. And so it was those vintages, the people who were getting the 05,
It's
06.
the vintage. Yes. The '05
Yes.
vintage was terrible.
Exactly. And so China has some of that. And then
Oh,
as you
yeah.
move down on prices, you can get a price spiral where it moves down even harder.
Oh, you will get a price spiral, I'll say. Yeah.
And it creates these issues throughout the economy, like we saw GFC. Now, is it to this level? And how much would they intervene? Those are things that'll be interesting. But when you've overbuilt resi, it can create problems. And so
No,
Morgan,
yeah. Well, let's talk about one more factor that the reason why they have 60 million vacant homes, at least a large proponent of that. So my wife Olivia is from Taiwan. I've been to China. I've seen these vacant communities. So I've been in this. So I've seen it all. In the Chinese culture, when you are middle class, you don't bank cash. And again, this is part of your point about 30 years of this being the right answer. You typically buy a second home. And again, their second homes, they're just like a box. They're not actually finished, right? Your job at some point, maybe your kid, maybe your grandkids, that's their inheritance. So they have looked at for 30 years, the most stable financial asset they have is residential real estate.
yeah,
Now, just think about the psychological break that is. You now have 30 years of belief that real estate never goes down. You have people transacting at these peak prices for a long time. Now they have lost faith in the government. The lockdowns were punitive and all of these things. And now they're looking at their nest egg going,
yeah,
shit, it's going to fall. This is going to be, in my opinion, you're not saying this, I am. This is a cycle, much like we went through 07, 08. That was 5 years. The
yeah,
first people to sell, they do okay. But when you talk at the family dinner and go, hey, I just sold my second home and I got 98% of it back. Woo. Then the next person sells and they get 95% back and then 90. This spiral could be bad.
and that's the thing. When you get a real property bust, you're not talking a little bit of time. It's a long period of time. And that's why I wanted to bring up the Great Depression. And maybe I'm invoking something that's way nastier than I should. But when you look at how many vacant units they have and how they have speculated so much, I think it's fair to invoke those periods. I think it's smart to kind
I
of
think
look at
so.
what can happen in history. And
You have to. You have to look at it.
and
Yes.
because the engine for the growth, your wings are clipped because Resi is that engine. And so, they're already lowering rates, by the way.
They are.
They're
They just lowered again this week. Yep.
and but the thing is, if the interest rate sensitive the economy is, and it should, it doesn't matter.
It's
When did
well,
we start?
it's again, it's worse than that. You have
Yeah.
taken a core family belief. This is entrenched in the Chinese culture. I'm going to get a second home at some time as my retirement, my pension, because they don't have that stuff there. This is my thing. And now they're seeing that core belief challenged.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And, it's an interesting chapter in the history of residential real estate because the Western economies are going through a period where we're all underbuilt by a lot, but we just overheated very hard and then had an interest rate shock on top of it. So we have very deteriorated affordability.
Yeah. The tug of war. Yeah.
But the thing that we have going is we're underbuilt.
Yeah. We don't have 60 million vacant homes in California. If we did,
And
that would be a problem.
anytime rates move down, activity will come. It will
The
come.
marginal buyer. Yep.
They're on the opposite end of the spectrum.
No, exactly. They don't need another home. They don't
Yeah.
need them.
And when did the Fed start cutting rates here? Oh 06, oh 07
Oh
start?
seven, I think, was it started.
And
That was the
they
first
cut the
cuts.
whole way to zero
They
and
did.
still could not get Resi moving the
And
whole
it
way
was
down.
because of the 2005 vintage, the I forget what it was called, strategic default, because everybody's pay. What people don't realize is in '05, when you had these teaser loans and 50% of the originations were arms, people could afford them for the first 2 years. It was
Yeah.
only after the interest rate shock that it became unaffordable. And then the strategic default became the right answer. People held the whole term while it was 0.9% interest rate. It's when it shot up to 8.9 that they're like, oh, I guess I can't refi like my mortgage broker told me I could. Oh, sell it at a loss. And that just, the wave just came wave after wave after wave. It was bad. So
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. And it's obviously, it's not something, and the other thing about it too is it bleeds over to the financial system.
for
Because at
sure.
the end of the day, banks in a large way are corporate debt and real estate debt.
Correct.
And so when you take out, real estate like that, it just creates issues that then bleeds over into the rest of the economy as lending gets tighter.
Yeah, I've never looked this up. I have an opinion, but it could be a well-informed, uninformed opinion. I don't think there's a lot of US banks like the JP, like the big ones. I don't think they have a huge percentage exposure to Chinese residential real estate. They may have commercial exposure, but I think a lot of that was internal lending in China. I don't know if you've looked that up or you know.
There were some papers out on it last year. And one thing we're not really bringing up here that I think is important too is that Morgan Stanley put out a report last week they sent to me, and they're predicting that from here through 2040, home sales will grind down in China like every year.
2040?
Yes.
It
And a
makes perfect
slump,
sense.
and
Wow.
that's demographics. That's not even the property bust. So they've
No.
had this happen into bad demographics. So it's, the things that you read about that people on the internet say about the US is
Yeah.
that like, oh, we're overbuilt
Yeah.
and, we have these terrible baby
Yeah. When the
boomers.
baby boomers go, all this vacant inventory is coming. Yeah, I
And,
see it.
and the truth is, we actually have a steady amount of immigration, and our birth rates aren't as low as the rest of the
Dire.
world.
Yeah.
And we still, we're actually growing in population. In some ways, the things the Bears have said about the US is true. They
In
just got
China.
it wrong
They got
time.
the country wrong.
Yeah. They're just 12
That's
times.
funny.
Yeah.
12 times. So oh, Lance, your housing. Thank you for coming back every week. Thank you for being a wealth of knowledge and making me laugh. I appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Yeah. They could find me on Twitter at News Lambert or Google Lance Lambert Fortune and find my author page.
Awesome, buddy. Thanks so much.